Good evening. It is day 8. The 8th day. Welcome. We have 5 minutes to settle in, to grab our Bibles. He is risen indeed. Or is it just stolen from ancient Egyptian and Greek myths? Dionysus and Osiris. No. It is day 8. We have made it 1 week. Evening Park End Church admins. So if you are following in a Bible, we are now on Exodus chapter 14. Do we get to see Rita? I think that would be an emphatic no from Rita, not from me. I'll take a picture of the text, the written text, and send it to her. She's also on dog duty. She has to keep the dog awake now for an hour. Otherwise, I go from having little sleep to no sleep. But we're not here about that. We're here to read the Word of God, and it's Exodus chapter 14. And we'll be starting in 3 minutes' time. What? Oh, that's Miles back today. What did we learn about Jesus? What did we learn about church? Two good all-encompassing questions which the Bible asks us to ask of the Bible when we read it. There are other questions we can ask as well, like what did we learn today that would help us build up our own local churches? That's a question that the Bible asks us to ask us. What did we learn about ourselves? That's a big one, but that comes under church in this series because we're keeping it just at 2. What were you rebuked about or challenged to become more thoroughly equipped to be a man or woman of God? That's in there. That's 2 Timothy 3:16, isn't it? Or 1 Timothy. 2 Timothy 3:16, I think. We have 1 minute. We are on Exodus chapter 14. If you're just dropping in for the first time, welcome. It's Resurrection Sunday. What a way to end Resurrection Sunday, by reading the accounts of the first ever Passover lamb slain and the deliverance of the church thereafter from Egyptian slavery. Welcome if it's your first time. Don't worry that you've missed any. Just drop on in. The Word of God speaks. Doesn't have to speak only if you read it chronologically, one day after the next. Welcome. May the Word of God speak today. Okay, well, it is, I believe, 9 o'clock. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Exodus chapter 14. Then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. By the way, we still have no reason to believe that it's not this same Lord speaking and leading. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore, across from Baal-zephon. Then Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness. And once again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites camped there as they were told. For the people who just came in, it's Exodus chapter 14, now verse 5. We've just started. The Egyptians pursue Israel. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done, letting all those Israelite slaves get away? They asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so he chased after the people of Israel, who had left with fists raised in defiance. The Egyptians chased after them with all the forces of Pharaoh's army, all his horses and chariots, and his charioteers and his troops. The Egyptians caught up with the people of Israel as they were camped beside the shore near Pi-hahiroth, across from Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians.' It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Just a question for the admins quickly. Is verse 13 in the King James, be still and see the salvation of the Lord? Is that one of the times that phrase comes up? The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Escape through the Red Sea. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots and his charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Then the angel of the God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. You have a real man here. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and Israelite camps. After darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and Israelites did not approach each other all night. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on each side. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. "Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites," the Egyptians shouted. "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, "Raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers." So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. Of all the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. That is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hands of the Egyptians that day. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. I'm not sure what your prayer life is like, but if you were trapped and you're part of church and you were trapped in a situation, do you pray those types of prayers? Mine would probably be, "Dear God, please put a little speed bump in the way of one of the horses so they don't completely destroy us. Like at least make one fall off." But what he actually does is part the sea, so you have all like the fish and stuff at head height and the mermaids and all that jazz. The church should learn about our God in terms of asking for things. Exodus chapter 15, a song of deliverance. Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. Yahweh is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and army has been hurled into the sea. The finest of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters gushed over them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, smashes the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow those who rise against you. You unleash your blazing fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your breath, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood straight like a wall. In the heart of it, the deep sea waters, it became hard. The enemy boasted, I will chase them and catch up with them. I will plunder them and consume them. I will flash my sword. My powerful hand will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord, glorious in holiness, awesome in splendor, performing great wonders? You raised your right hand, and the earth swallowed our enemies. With your unfailing love, the people you have redeemed. In your might, you guide them to your sacred home. The peoples hear and tremble. Anguish grips those who live in Philistia. The leaders of Edom are terrified, and the nobles of Moab tremble. All who live in Canaan melt away. Terror and dread fall upon them. The power of your arm makes them lifeless as stone until your people pass by, O Lord, until the people you purchased pass by. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, reserved for your own dwelling. The sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever. Yeah, it was stand still and see the salvation of the Lord in Exodus 14. Yeah, I thought it was by memory. That's one of the belters in the King James Version. When Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers rushed into the sea, the Lord brought the water crashing down on them. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine and led all the women as they played their tambourines and danced. And Miriam sang this song. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea. Sorry, just pushing my phone away in case it interferes with sound. Bitter water at Marah. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Now remember Marah and Meribah for when we get to parts of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Just remember it. and Psalms, and the Psalms. Yeah. They look back to this event a lot, the ancient church. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. It was there at Marah that the Lord set before them the following decree as a standard to test their faithfulness to him. He said, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his commands and keeping all his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. After leaving Marah, the Israelites traveled onto the oasis of Elim, where they found 12 springs and 70 palm trees. They camped there beside the water. So remember that day where the ancient church complained, and they put a piece of wood, and the water became pure so the church could be refreshed. There are some absolutely guff commentaries on that passage which say it must have been one of those porous woods which would have filtered out all of the dirt from the water, and you just picture Moses the other side telling 600,000 of them, wait, just wait a minute, wait. I mean, it's crackers. It's just, as ever, the wood of the Lord cleanses all unrighteousness. Good Friday. Exodus chapter 16. Manna and quail from heaven. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I am going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. That the cross-reference to that passage elsewhere, when the other times the church complain or they look back at moments like this, they also desire garlic and cucumbers and melons more than Jesus. They would rather that than actually be hungry with the Lord. It's a real lesson for the church, isn't it? Would we rather have garlic, melons, and cucumbers without the Lord, or be with the Lord in a desert wilderness without the comforts of life? Huge sticking point for the ancient church, that decision. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, by evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. What have we done that you should complain about us? Then Moses added, the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not us." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Announce this to the entire community of Israel. Present yourselves before the Lord, for he has heard your complaining." And as Aaron spoke to the whole community of Israel, they looked out towards the wilderness. There they could see the awesome glory of the Lord in the cloud. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp, and the next morning the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. "What is it?" they asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, "It is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent." So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, "Do not keep any of it till morning." But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until the morning. But by then it was full of maggots, Gaten, and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. It's a trust thing, isn't it? Do you trust that the Lord will provide for you tomorrow, or are you going to stuff your pockets full tonight just in case he does one over on you tomorrow? That's the issue here. He says he'll look after the church. The church don't trust him. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need. And as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today and set aside what is left for tomorrow." So they put some aside until morning, just as Moses had commanded. And in the morning, the leftover food was wholesome and good, without maggots or odor. Moses said, "Eat this food for today is a Sabbath day dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground today. You may gather food for 6 days, but the 7th day is the Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day." Some of the people went out anyway on the 7th day, but they found no food. The Lord asked Moses, "How long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. This is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day, so that there will be enough for 2 days. On the Sabbath day, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out to pick up food on the 7th day." So the people did not gather any food on the 7th day. Just aside there, you know that in the Genesis account, the Lord rests on the Sabbath day, and his whole purpose now is to call his church into his rest. So he gives them one day of a week of a picture of what that is. It's sort of like a multimedia display of just resting. Stop from your labors. It's a picture of what the church is being called to spiritually. Just rest from your burdens and rest in the Lord. That's why the Sabbath is a massive thing. The Israelites called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. Then Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Fill a 2-quart container with manna to preserve it for your descendants. Then later generations will be able to see the food I gave you in the wilderness when I set you free from Egypt." Moses said to Aaron, "Get a jar and fill it with 2 quarts of manna. Then put it in a sacred place before the Lord to preserve it for all future generations." Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He eventually placed it in the Ark of the Covenant in front of the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. So the people of Israel ate manna for 40 days until they arrived at the land where they would settle. They ate manna and they came to the border of the land of Canaan. The container used to measure the manna was an omer, which was just 1/10 of an ephah. It held about 2 quarts. So there we are, Bible Hour gang. That's the end now. Surely we've read the whole Bible. The Son has led his church to meet the Father at the mountain. They know how to rest. They're going to get there. It's only taken them 40 days. That's it. Easy. Oh, Exodus chapter 17. Water from the rock. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. And remember that for when we get to the Psalms. There's a lot of looking back at this event. "Quiet," Moses replied. "Why are you complaining against me, and why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? And why are you trying to kill us, our children and our livestock, with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They are ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people. Take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock of Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and the water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink." So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Moses named the place Massa, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing. But because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, "Is it the Lord here with us or not?" Massa and Meribah, when they didn't trust that the Lord would provide their every need, and they groaned. Remember that. Israel defeats the Amalekites. While the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Moses commanded Joshua, "Choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us." Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill holding the staff of God in my hand. There's Joshua. First time. Remember him. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood each side of Moses, holding up his hands. So his hands held steady until sunset. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. After the victory, the Lord instructed Moses, write this down on a scroll as a permanent reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. He said, they have raised their fist against the Lord's throne, so now the Lord will be at war with Amalek generation after generation. I'll tell you why that's one of my favorite passages, because if you have a man holding a plank of wood and his arms are getting tired, it's likely to come down about here across his shoulders. And then if you have a man on his left and then a man on his right, you have a plank of wood with a man basically like this, with two people either side of him on a hill. And when that happens, the church is victorious. Love it. Exodus chapter 18. Jethro's visit to Moses. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything God had done for Moses and his people, the Israelites. He especially heard about how the Lord had rescued them from Egypt. Earlier, Moses had sent his wife, Zipporah, and his two sons back to Jethro, who had taken them in. Moses' first son was named Gershom, for Moses had said when the boy was born, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. Excuse me. His second son was named Eliezer, for Moses had said, the God of my ancestors was my helper. He rescued me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, now came to visit Moses in the wilderness. He brought Moses' wife and two sons with him, and they arrived while Moses and the people were camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent a message to Moses saying, I, Jethro, your father-in-law, am coming to see you with your wife and your two sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. They asked about each other's welfare, and they went into Moses' tent. Moses told his father-in-law everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and Egypt on behalf of Israel. He also told about all the hardships they had experienced along the way and how the Lord had rescued his people from all their troubles. Jethro was delighted when he heard about the good things the Lord had done for Israel as he rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. Praise the Lord, Jethro said, for he has rescued you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Yes, he has rescued Israel from the powerful hand of Egypt. I know now that the Lord is greater than all other gods because he rescued his people from the oppression of the proud Egyptians. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. Aaron and all the elders of Israel came out and joined him in a sacrificial meal in God's presence. This next bit comes up in Deuteronomy 1, where Moses reveals a pastoral problem that he once had, and someone really helped him with it. Jethro's wise advice. The next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening? Why, church leader, are you trying to do everything on your own?" Moses replied, "Because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When a dispute arises, they come to me, and I am the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions." "This is not good," Moses' father-in-law exclaimed. "You are going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. Now listen to me, and let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him. Teach them God's decrees and give them his instructions. Show them how to conduct their lives, but select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. So there you go. Small group leadership, house groups. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. Just on a personal note, the amount of fellow Park End members and elders that email regularly asking if there's anything they can do to help me is incredible. They've obviously read Moses. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed his suggestions. He chose capable men from all over Israel and appointed them as leaders over the people. He put them in charge of groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. These men were always available to solve the people's common disputes. They brought the major cases to Moses, but they took care of the smaller matters themselves. Soon after this, Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, who returned to his own land. Is it in Acts 5 or 6 where there are widows who they're not getting their food, they're not being looked after, but the apostles, some of them are like, "Sorry, I can't handle that right now. We have got to teach the word of God and pray." So, and then they appoint, thanks, 6, we have got to appoint deacons to help us with this, so everybody's needs are met. It's just everybody's nicking from Moses. I'm trying to model Park End Church on the Church of Moses. It's such a healthy church. Sort of. Just wait. Exodus chapter 19. Now we are coming up to the third already. I can't believe it. This is one of the ultimate chapters of chapters. So just take a minute. Exodus 19. Go get some food, whatever it is. I'll read Kara's text, who says, I've got a lockdown haircut. Thank you, Kara. We will recommence in 30 seconds. Okay. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Hey, Kara, take that dispute to Dave Williams. Okay, I'm dealing with bigger stuff right now. Exodus chapter 19. The Lord reveals himself at Sinai. They get there. This is it. The purpose of the church. Exactly 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt, they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. After breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and set up camp there at the base of Mount Sinai. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel." So Moses returned from the mountain and called together the elders of the people and told them everything the Lord had commanded him. And all the people responded together, "We will do everything that the Lord has commanded." So Moses brought the people's answer back to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will come to you in a thick cloud, Moses, so the people themselves can hear me when I speak with you. Then they will always trust you." Moses told the Lord what the people had said, and then the Lord told Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothes. Be sure they are ready on the third day. Life will come. Rigor, power on that third day. For on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful. Do not go up the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain. So Moses went down to the people. He consecrated them for worship, and they washed their clothes. He told them, get ready for the third day, and until then, abstain from having sexual intercourse. On the morning of the third day, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came down on the mountain. There was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn, and all the people trembled. Moses led them out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the ram's horns grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. The Lord came down on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses climbed the mountain. Then the Lord told Moses, go back down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die. Even the priests who regularly come near to the Lord must purify themselves so that the Lord does not break out and destroy them. But Lord, Moses protested, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai. You already warned us. You told me, mark off a boundary all around the mountain and set it apart as holy. But the Lord said, go down and bring Aaron back up with you. In the meantime, do not let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord, or he will break out and destroy them. So Moses went down to the people and told them what he had said. Deuteronomy 1-5 gives a backstory to that they approached the mountain and then retreated to their tents because they didn't trust. They were afraid. And I think it's Deuteronomy 5 where it says, basically, after all the Lord had done for them, they still didn't trust him and they withdrew to their tents. And there is the turning point of the ancient church. We'll see it later in more detail, but the Son brings the Father. The Son brings the church to the Father, and the church has unbelief and retreats. And then the Lord God has to pick up the pieces again. Right, okay, let's do it the hard way. Then he brings in the law to teach them all about what his Father is like. Hence we get Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, where it's just like, all right, you botched coming to the Lord, you ran away, now let me teach you, church, about what my Father's like. So we're going to act things out. You're going to have to kill animals. You're going to have to not go in certain places unless you wash. You're going to have to pray certain times. You're going to have to read scripture certain times. We're just going to act it all out. You're going to have to come through a priest in order to get through this curtain where my Father is, because you need a priest to do it. And he's going to love it when you do it, as long as you're trusting in me. We'll just do that for like 500 years until because you're so dull and you don't get it. It's all after the botch of Exodus 19. And the reason I went off and I've stopped reading for a second, because that is so key to church theology. Hebrews even says it. Have you come to Mount Zion with all its thunder and things? Or have you come to the heavenly Zion? We have come to the heavenly Zion. When you approach God, are you frightened, witless, in an unbelieving way, and it's just fire and cackles? Or can you go up with Moses because you're trusting in the priest? Sorry, Exodus 20. 10 commandments for the covenant community. Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Redemption, then comes obedience. You must not have any other gods but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. Simon Joseph, legend. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse my name. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. And if you've just joined the stream, rewind about 20 minutes where I had a brief little 1-minute thing on why we're called to rest on a day, one day, or at least they were. Are we? Honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. When the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horns, and when they saw the flashes of lightning and the smoke billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance, trembling with fear. And they said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen, but don't let God speak to us directly, or we will die." Remember that for Deuteronomy. "Don't be afraid," Moses answered them, "for God has come in this way to test you, and so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning." As the people stood in the distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. Proper use of altars. And the Lord said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel: You saw for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver and gold to rival me. Build for me an altar made of earth and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Build my altar wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural, uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up the steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness." The Lord here is starting to spell out a bit of what heaven on earth is supposed to look like. The church is just meant to be a display of what heaven on earth is look like. Clean. We're into the last 5 minutes, folks. Exodus chapter 21. fair treatment of slaves. These are the regulations you must present to Israel. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve you for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. If he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. If a master gave him a wife while he was a slave, and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the 7th year, but his wife and children will still belong to his master. But the slave may declare, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free. And if he does this, his master must present him before God. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. When the man sells his daughters as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. If she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. But he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners, since he is the one who broke the contract with her. If the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he will no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter. If a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. If he fails in any of these 3 obligations, she may leave as a free woman without making the payment. Cases of personal injury. Anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. But if it was simply an accident permitted by God, I will appoint a place of refuge where the slayer can run for safety. However, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. That is a study in and of itself, why the honor of the God-given authority was such that a fist up to them was a fist up to the rule of God, and that consistent behavior, you're just like, no, you're cut off from life. You don't get the system. You don't get that God's the Father. You don't get how this works, and you're displaying it. You hate kingdom living. So there's no place for you. If you reject life, you just get death. There's a really interesting study on that. Obedience to parents and why these things matter. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. Anyone who dishonors father or mother must be put to death. Now, suppose 2 men quarrel, and one hits the other with a stone or fist, and the injured person does not die but is confined to bed. If he is later able to walk outside again, even with a crutch, the assailant will not be punished, but must compensate his victim for the lost wages and provide for his full recovery. If a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. Isn't it interesting that the Lord is assuming what we're capable of, all the evils we can get up to, and he's putting these regulations in for when we basically act like complete and utter criminal pagans? But if the slave owner recovers within a day or 2, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is in his property. Now, suppose 2 men are fighting, and in the process, they accidentally strike a pregnant woman, so she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, then the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of compensation the woman's husband demands and that the judges approve. But if there is further injury, the punishment must match the injury: a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. It's interesting there that that's a law given to almost like judicial authorities, not necessarily to an individual to go and just take a foot off a guy because he's had his foot taken off him. It's going through a wise panel here, isn't it? On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the 10 o'clock mark, just as we are unpacking what heaven on earth is going to look like and how countercultural the Lord wants the church to be among the nations of Amalekite pagans and Canaanite pagans. They are going to do family life, sex, money, work ethic in a countercultural, clean way where purity and honor is kept, and people who reject the authority of God are just cut out. It's a fascinating time for the Mosaic church. And are they going to listen when he comes back down to tell them? This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And I will see you all, God willing, tomorrow at 9 p.m. The Lord is risen. He is risen indeed.